Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Preston here, and this is my post-fight reaction to Oleksandr Usyk stopping Rico Verhoeven in the 11th round, and yeah, man, and stuff like that. Overall, I wasn't, home at the time of me watching the fight and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I did watch a replay of the fight and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And I watched the full fight replay because I had to watch the full fight, and overall and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Just to start it off and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Um, just to start it off and stuff like that. You know what I mean? The fight was competitive. You know what I mean? Verhoeven definitely won the early rounds. That's for sure. He definitely won the early rounds. I don't know about the early rounds. I would say the early rounds was 4-0 in favor of Verhoeven. I would say the mid rounds. I feel like the mid rounds was a tie, and I would say the later rounds was, I would say, Oleksandr Usyk, in my opinion. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. Let's see if I could get more photos for you guys. Um but yeah, and stuff like that. But Verhoeven, he still did his thing, though. You know what I mean? And he still showed that he had a lot of power and a lot of accuracy, kind of like how I was anticipating and stuff like that, that he was going to have a lot of power and with accuracy. And he actually has not too bad of footwork. Because he's a tall, he's a big heavyweight, Rico Verhoeven. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. So he could get into distance very well. He could get into distance pretty easily. I'm not saying he could do it in an elite fashion. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. Like, I'm not saying he could do it in an elite fashion. And stuff like that. But I mean, but if you give him the chance, I mean, he's going to make a fight very competitive, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see Rico Verhoeven in the ring again, but I mean, you never really know, and stuff like that, but I do like, realistically, I mean, I do wish I was home for this fight, but I mean, I just was busy, and stuff like that, I have different things of what I do and stuff like that, you know what I mean, of working and stuff, so that's the thing and stuff like that, you know what I mean. Um, but overall, I mean, it was really cool seeing of how the fight was at the pyramid, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. It was really cool how the fight was at the pyramid, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And and like the view of the pyramid, I wish the fight was more in the daytime, and stuff. But I mean, at that point, I mean, we would have had to wake up a lot more earlier at that point and stuff like that, But if I'm not mistaken, I think Egypt is on like the same time, almost the same time as Great Britain, and stuff like that, like, I'm just saying, because when they fought and stuff like that, it was like during like the same time. Like, maybe it was a different day and stuff like that, you know what I mean? I don't really know and stuff, but they made it work out and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But just like all of these big fights, bro, and but yeah, I miss where the fights and stuff like that, would be like, during like, like early, I mean, more like during like, later and stuff like that. Like, all of these fights nowadays are more earlier, bro, and stuff like that. Like, I miss where all the fights would be like more later and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But I mean, at the same time, I can understand and stuff like that, because boxing is at its best right now, and it's just, I just feel like, it's just boxing at the pyramid and stuff like that, it's just, that's something that's never been done before, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, so in that kind of sequence, it just, I understand very much so. I could very much so understand, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? But overall, and shit like that, you know what I mean? Rico Verhoeven, even though like, he lost the fight, and stuff like that, but overall he still was winning and shit, and stuff like that, but honestly, But yeah, and stuff like that, you know what I mean. But overall and stuff like that, you know what I mean. Rico did do pretty good, but it just at the same time, I just don't think that overall and stuff like that, the fight was. I mean, at the same time and shit like that, I feel like like Usyk could have landed more punches on Rico, but kind of like what happened with McGregor and Mayweather. Like what happened with with McGregor later on in the fight. He got tired. Right when he got tired, like Mayweather was literally just messing. Mayweather was literally just messing with McGregor the whole time, and stuff like that. He could have stopped McGregor earlier if he wanted to, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. People wanted to like blame it on his age, blah blah blah, and stuff like that. Like he was just waiting for McGregor to slow down, and I just feel like that was kind of what Usyk was trying to do, and kind of like let me see if I could pull it up right here, because Usyk said they say it was tense watching my fight with Rico. Guys, I just didn't want you to be bored. Come on. Like, so I'm just saying, and shit. Like, let me repeat that. They say, so this is what Oleksandr Usyk said. They say it was tense watching my fight with Rico. Ha. Guys, I just didn't want you to be bored. Come on now. And that's what he said and shit. And that's kind of what I was like thinking, because it just overall, like Usyk fought, like usually fights with more lateral movement, doesn't really like to, just stay into range with people all the time and shit like that. You know what I mean? I just feel like he just wanted the fight to look more competitive, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. He was just waiting for his perfect moment to get to Rico and stuff like that, and because he could have done it more earlier. I feel like Usyk really could have done it more earlier and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But it just more of at the same time, everybody was already pissed about how this fight was already happening, you know what I mean? So Usyk didn't want people to just feel like that this was just a waste of money, a waste of time, for people to watch a fight, like a nonsense fight. He like overall he wanted it to look more competitive, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. He just didn't want nobody to be bored and stuff, and to just say, and just to for him to mollywalk Rico within like the first 4 rounds. He didn't want to do that to Rico and stuff, and to make you guys already even more pissed and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, so overall that's the thing and stuff like that, because that's the thing, because with Mayweather, that was the same thing with Mayweather, and stuff like that. McGregor was winning and winning until Mayweather showed, like, started throwing his hands and started letting his hands fly, and then that's where he stopped McGregor. It was the same thing for Oleksandr Usyk. Once he let his hands really let his hands go against Rico, where when he started really letting his hands go and stuff like that, like when Usyk really started letting his hands go, was more in like the start of like the later rounds, and it took him only like maybe 3 to 4 rounds after that to stop Rico. But it wasn't even like he was like throwing for the fences. He was just normally throwing, picking his shots, but he was using those moments to like, and he was trying to quickly get those moments in so then he could stop Rico, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And B, also, let's be honest with you, it's not like these people are just gonna give the fucking fight to Rico, man. It was not like Rico dominated Oleksandr Usyk. Like, I'm just saying, like Usyk before he stopped Rico won, cause it was like 11 rounds and shit like that. Well, I mean, Usyk was down bad on the cards. I ain't gonna lie, though. And shit like that, like, Rico was winning those rounds. I ain't gonna lie, though. But, but Usyk, won, I would say, like, 3 rounds before he started letting his hands go. And then won the last 3 rounds, and shit like that, or 4 rounds and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So overall, he would have already bagged in a win, You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. You know what I mean? But overall, I mean, this was a really good fight. It was entertaining, and stuff like that. I feel like that overall people should definitely appreciate the fight more and shit like that. You know what I mean? That overall you still got to see Oleksandr Usyk in the ring. You got and for the kickboxing fans, they got to see like the best kickboxer of all time, and stuff like that, on paper, and shit like that, to fans of Rico Verhoeven, and they both fought in the ring. So I'm just saying, and stuff. So I mean, so it was something that that people got where they enjoyed of what they got. You know what I mean? Because boxing is the sport where you get paid the most money, and shit like that. Like I couldn't see this happening in kickboxing. Kickboxing isn't as popular as boxing. Like it would like everybody was watching this fight. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But overall, the early rounds and stuff like that, obviously Rico Verhoeven, and stuff like that, 4-0. Mid rounds was a tie. Later rounds was Oleksandr Usyk, and then he got the stoppage, and stuff like that. And that's where I had it. And before the stoppage, I had it a tie leading to Oleksandr Usyk slightly edging it on the cards. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. Rico more had a dominant rounds, more in my opinion, more in the early rounds. He more had a dominant rounds in the early rounds, but he was still getting countered. You know what I mean? Hold up, he was still getting countered. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. He was still getting countered, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit. He was, Rico Verhoeven was still getting countered, and stuff like that, But Rico Verhoeven was still getting countered, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, he was still getting countered, you know what I mean? And yeah. But yeah, Rico Verhoeven was still getting countered, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, he was still getting countered, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. Like, Rico Verhoeven was still getting countered by those punches by Oleksandr Usyk. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. So, even though he was landing those good shots, but Usyk was still in it, the whole time. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. Like, he was still in the fight. He was still in the fight. He still picked apart, Rico and shit like that. You know what I mean? But it just, at the same time, it was still a good fight. It was still a good fight. But it just, at the same time, it just more with the stoppage. But eventually, Usyk already found his groove. He already found his accuracy. He already found what he needed to do and shit like that. You know what I mean? So in that kind of case of scenario and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Hold up, guys. Hold up. But overall, in that kind of case of scenario, and shit like that, you know what I mean? Hold on. But yeah, and shit like that, you know what I mean? But overall and stuff like that, Usyk was still in the fight. Usyk still, was doing his thing and shit, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But I can understand how it was kind of more of an early stoppage. But Usyk still found his groove. He still found hit of what he needed to do. he was still hurting Rico Verhoeven. So, and he still was hurting him in the 11th round. Verhoeven eventually would have went down. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. Like, even though Verhoeven didn't get dropped at all in the fight, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like, and like, they're probably, like, but, like, I'm pretty damn sure he didn't get dropped in this fight. But yeah, actually, he did drop Usyk. Rico. Usyk. He did drop Rico. Usyk did drop Rico and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But but at the same time and shit like that. You know what I mean? Um, he did. He dropped Rico, huh? It probably was even that bad of but at the same time they could have let it go on a little bit longer and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But at the same time and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like, they could have like had it go on a little bit longer, but I mean, at the same time, I can understand because it's just more of like he was still getting hurt. You know what I mean? And he was taking effect of those shots pretty early from Oleksandr Usyk. So I mean, I could kind of understand, but at the same time, it was still early. It was still early, but eventually Usyk would have got the stoppage because he would have landed every single shot on Verhoeven, and Verhoeven would have not been able to do anything. I mean, he could have countered to make Usyk, think more and shit like that, but at that point, Usyk is just like, unless if you're gonna knock Usyk out, and shit like that, which isn't easy to knock Usyk out, I mean, unless if you hit him flesh on the chin. I mean, but it's nobody has ever hit like Usyk flesh on the chin. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. But either way, like Usyk would have most likely would have stopped Rico eventually. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit. But overall, that's my final post fight reaction to Oleksandr Usyk defeating Oleg to my So that is my final post fight reaction to Oleksandr Usyk stopping Rico Verhoeven in the 11th round in the Pyramid of Giza of Egypt, at the Pyramid of Giza of Egypt. And yeah, man, and this was a super fight. And yeah, man, and shit like that. And honestly, these kind of fights are very entertaining, but these are fights of where where you're only gonna see it after a while. And the one thing that sucks is that Dana White hates whenever his fucking UFC fighters does these type of things. Like, that's why he kind of fell off with Conor McGregor, because then McGregor got kind of more rich, because then he got rich off of Mayweather, and that's the thing and shit like that, and so. And obviously with Dana White, he gets butthurt and shit, so he's like, damn, well, I'm not gonna really fuck with you like that no more and shit, but yeah, and shit like that. But I would like to see that, with UFC fighters, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. Like maybe Usyk versus Alex Pereira or some shit. Like, I don't even like Usyk, Usyk would tear up Alex Pereira. Like even though Pereira got some good power though. And shit like that, but anyways, that's my final thoughts. Usyk did his thing. Usyk just had to do what he had to do to make the fight entertaining, to make it where, he can make it where, it was more reasonable to make it a pay-per-view and shit like that, you know what I mean? And yeah, and stuff like that. And he just had to do what he had to do, man, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Usyk still got the win. I kind of predicted where Usyk was gonna, I kind of predicted where Usyk was gonna fight, of how he would fight more harder, and shit like that, but then he was gonna walk through Rico and shit like that, you know what I mean? And stuff, because I feel like he was gonna, my prediction, I feel like he was gonna win the early rounds. I feel like Usyk was gonna win the early rounds, and then in the mid rounds, that's where he was gonna start to really, land those bombs on Rico, and then that's where I see where Usyk would stop Rico in the 7th round. But overall Usyk was playing with this food the whole time, basically just trying to make the fight competitive and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So then he can make the whole pay-per-view more entertaining. You know, because it's in Giza, and you know making it be like, oh shoot, is this kickboxer actually gonna win? Blah blah blah. And he's like, nope. And then walks through Rico, and shit like that. But Rico still did pretty damn good though, and shit like that, So I mean, I gotta give credit to Rico and Conor McGregor during the time of when McGregor, and during the time of when McGregor was in his prime and fought against Mayweather. So I mean, either way, we got to give credit to both these guys, Rico and Conor, back in the day when he fought against Mayweather in the ring. And I'm just saying, because those were super fights, bro. And I'm just saying, if I'm gonna say though, before this video ends, if I'm gonna say which one was better, Mayweather and McGregor. I'm just gonna say, even though I do like how it wasn't. I don't know. I feel like both of them was pretty good. I mean, I liked how the fact was. I liked the fact of how it was in the pyramid, how it was at the pyramid of Giza, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But it's just more of like at the same time and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like during those times like that, those were literally like. I like it. Just Mayweather was more of a popular name than Usyk. And even though everybody knows Usyk, over in his country and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But literally everybody knows Mayweather over here and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And you ain't Irish if you don't know who the hell Conor McGregor is, and stuff like that, I'm just gonna say that, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And yeah, and shit like that, you know what I mean? But yeah, man, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But thank y'all for watching this video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. I'm Preston. Peace out, man.